In this series, lowimpact.org talks with people working to build a mutually owned, democratic, decentralised economy that builds community and doesn't destroy nature. We want to increase collaboration to bring about system change. Find links to the sites mentioned in the videos in the description below. Join the conversation by liking, commenting and subscribing to our channel.
Let's talk about the benefits of sociocracy. So in what ways is sociocracy better than other ways of coming to decisions?
So it depends on where you're coming from, right? If you're coming from a very horizontal, everybody decides everything together kind of context, often what people struggle with is just that everything takes such a long time, and all kinds of people will have all kinds of opinions about things that they shouldn't even have, a say on. A big example from my own community that was run by whole group consensus for 18 years before adopting sociocracy. So there's been some track record there.
How many people?
70 or 80.
70 or 80 with whole group consensus.
I know. I'm also amazed for 18 years. Like,
it worked okay with 15 people at my community. But
so yeah, so there's one practical example, or actually one real example that I was told is some small group was motivated to repaint the basement of the community building. So they figured out what it would cost and how they would do it and so on, and then they needed to make a proposal to the whole community. And the whole community shot it down because some people were like, "Whoa, do we really have to repaint it?" Blah, 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 blah. All the things that happen if you ask a simple question to a large group of people. And people really got frustrated with that, because of course, from the doer point of view, the people who wanted to paint the basement, they would say, okay, hold on. So you're telling me I'm putting in volunteer effort and doing something that I think needs to be done, and I organize it, and you just shoot it down. Mm. So now how many times am I gonna, like next time I have an idea, am I gonna say it? Am I gonna propose it? I'm not just gonna say, screw it, I'm gonna paint my own basement, and put my creative energy there. Mm. So, and that's what happens. And in a way, and that only shows after some time, groups that run that way can become conservative because it's so much effort to change something.
Yeah.
And people don't put in the effort anymore, and things just kind of stagnate. Yeah. So that's what happens in horizontal organizations. And what sociocracy brings there is just the power of small groups, the power of not everybody decides everything, right? Yeah. So now you can actually move things forward, and you don't always have to have. And
I guess for some people, it's some people are less outgoing than others, and so in a smaller group, making decisions is much easier for some people to speak and have their voice heard.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really a big issue, or that's something that I take issue with, especially, for example, if the whole group decision making with a large group is trying to be sold as inclusive, and I just don't find it inclusive. I know it makes sense if you want to make a decision with 50 people and to be as inclusive as possible, to think, oh, let's just all talk, but it doesn't happen that we all talk. It's some people that talk.
Yes.
So it just doesn't line up. I know it sounds intuitive, and it's not what happens. So, and that's sometimes a tough conversation to have with organizations, when they're like, oh, but we want everybody to be able to decide on everything. We're like, yeah, but that means you're gonna effectively not have inclusive decision making. That is not a good strategy. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Anyway, but let me talk about more top-down organizations, or less horizontal organizations and the benefits there. So I mean, the classic, of course, is you have one boss that decides everything, and then you have a hierarchy underneath. And of course, what happens there is that people just get endlessly frustrated because their voice isn't being heard, right? Yeah. And because they might have great ideas, or they might know what's going wrong, right? But nobody listens to them. Yeah. And that, of course, is different in sociocracy, because the people who work together are the people who make things together. So their expertise from the actual doing is really taken seriously. What's tricky there sometimes is that people aren't always so happy to all of a sudden be co-responsible.
Yeah, some people don't want that quite as much, do they? They'd rather be just given a job and go off and do it.
Right, and that I even have some like that I understand. I think what I'm more, like, because for example, in some circles, I also just want to go do the work, and I actually literally sometimes write to people like, just tell me what to do,
Yeah.
because I can't be in another group where I have to think my way through what the best thing is and so on. But so that I understand to some extent. Of course, you can't run an organization just with people like that who have that approach to everything they do. But what I'm more worried about is when people want to defer and then blame. It's like, oh, like it's also a reason why in sociocracy, for example, standing aside is not a thing. So you can't just say, oh, I don't think that's a good idea, but go ahead and do it. And we're like, well, wait, that just means if now we screw it up, you're going to tell us that you've been telling us all along.
Yes, that was the big thing. We didn't want anybody to be anti, because later they'd say, told you so, I told you so. It was a big mistake.
Exactly.
You don't want that. And you don't want
Right.
people to split into factions either.
Right. And that dynamic you can both have in horizontal consensus run organizations, but also in hierarchies, right?
Yeah.
So it's that same not wanting to be responsible, because, and again, of course, this is not easy to pass blame here, that's not my point. I'm just trying to highlight kind of the dynamics, because of course it makes a lot of sense to behave that way if you're used to a system where fault is just attached to a person, right? And then it's just like, well, and now you're fired, or now you're whatever, canceled. And so it's coming from a real experience, right? And a real worry. But in sociocracy, you kind of have to step out of that pattern and really take responsibility, and also cut each other slack and learn together and really be in that same boat, right? So that requires a little bit of a mindset change for some.
Can we touch on any potential downsides? I can think of a few potential ones. I mean, is there a danger that it might be used too rigidly or literally and cause decision-making processes to seize up? Or might it involve a lot of training and be difficult to implement?
Those two things. And then I'll add a third one. Yes, new learners, in my experience, are the most rigid.
Right.
And it's just like with anything, you can be dogmatic about it, right? You can be dogmatic about literally anything, and that's true for sociocracy too. And it's like sometimes we have new and learning groups, where people call us and said, like so that this is the right way, but I say that this is the right way. Which one is it? And we're like, excuse me, I'm not, like, I am not going to make a decision on what the right way is for you.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, I'm not in the business of doing that. So figure it out. I mean, ultimately, my colleague has this great line that he says, if it's rigid, it's not sociocracy. Because the overall everything is that the overall guiding principle, the way he describes it, is no one ignored. So as soon as you use sociocracy to ignore people, or to, make some more like holier than others, then you're out of sociocracy. It's out of integrity already.
Yeah.
So yes, dogmatism and rigidity is an issue for new learners. Typically, they ease up after a while. The second one, not enough training. That is quite common too. And then, of course, if people are anxious, they also get more rigid, right? So sometimes the rigidity can also be a direct effect of not having received enough training and kind of wanting to do it right, but not quite being comfortable. And the third one I want to say is if it's kind of just window dressing.
Right.
And the power structures don't actually change.
Yes.
That I'm very skeptical of. And sometimes, sometimes for example, I was asked by the owner of a company, like, I want to introduce this, and I asked him, yeah, so what do you want to learn in the process of doing this? And he said, learn? No, I just want people to be more involved so we can get more done. I thought, that sounds awfully top down, and it sounds like he knows everything and everybody else still needs to catch up. I was not interested in that job.
So, can I just ask another quick question? Might sociocracy clash with the legal governance documents of companies, including co-ops, where ultimate decision making is vested in a board of directors?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. No,
I
sorry.
mean, the decisions could possibly be reached via sociocracy and then ratified in ways that conform to the legal setup.
Yes.
But might there be sort of mission drift?
Yeah. Yeah, there's kind of many different scenarios here. One that you're naming, of course, our legal system is heavily biased towards centralized systems, right?
Yeah.
Like who can be blamed? Who
Yeah.
can be held responsible? Who's going to pay? So that's an issue for sure. And yes, as you're saying, exactly, we play with that of how can decisions just be made in a sociocratic way, and the board takes a deep breath and ratifies it.
Yeah.
And we do, I mean, we're we're nonprofit, so we have to have a board and all of that and be compliant. And we're just all holding it with awareness and with intentionality, and that's okay. It all works. I mean, realistically, in a larger nonprofit, it's not true that the board looks to every budget line and understands each and everything that is being done. So there's always some decentralization, even when people don't seem to remember that. Like, for example, if you have an intern writing on social media for a big nonprofit, right, you've now just given them power. They can screw up anyway. But and the other piece is right with co-ops, or also with some incorporations for intentional communities, depending on how they incorporate. It might be that some decisions have to be made by all members.
Yeah.
And we do that, for example, in my community. It's the same thing. And one of the workarounds is that, for example, the budget has to be approved by everybody. So the budget is not approved by one small circle.
Right.
It's prepared by a small circle, and then it goes to the general circle, and then it goes to the whole group, and then it gets ratified there.
Yeah.
So we work up sociocratically until we are not allowed to anymore. But it's really, it's very simple, because typically the homework has already been done by that point.
Yeah. And also, I mean, co-ops often appoint directors via an election involving all the members, and that would clash with the sociocratic approach, wouldn't it?
Right. And then there's workarounds like that you can do, or you just go with it. It depends a little bit on the size and how easy you can do it. And for example, the selection process that we use, right, selecting people by consent, can also be tweaked for for large groups. So that's all. Yeah, it really depends. One kind of has to find its way through the jungle of making it work.
Yeah. So you touched on this. I mean, it can be used just as well by Unilever as it can by a cooperative or a commons group. But I guess if people get used to the idea of collective rather than top-down decision-making, they might also start to question the ownership of an organization and which way the money moves within it.
I am very much with you on that, yes. For example, I remember a for-profit that was introducing Sociocracy, and I was in the mood of poking them a little bit. So I asked, like, oh, that's great. I said, what are you going to do about salaries? And they said, oh, we decided not to look at that in the exactly.
Sure.
Oh, we decided not to touch salaries in the first year. And I thought, okay, yeah, I get it, because you don't want to change everything at once, but there's no way they're going to get away with that forever, right? There's just no way. So ultimately it's going to happen. So yeah, maybe it's, some people call it, hold on, what are they saying? Trojan mice. Do you know that the Trojan horse?
Trojan mice.
It's smaller, you just plant it everywhere. Salary transparency is one, salary decisions are one, and all those different pieces. And at some point, the system just can't be held up anymore. That's the hope, yes. And that's also why it's so important to already in the work of doing that, of preparing, like, what are the ownership models, right? That we really would want to have, right? And what are the legal systems that we would really want to have? And there is some work around that. It's still in the early stages, but there's work around that, so that we're ready once the system implodes and people really want alternatives, so that they're ready.
So if I'm a member of a group who's thinking about incorporating sociocracy, what sort of preparation and research is required? How can I learn how to do it?
Well, one of the early pieces of our work in the nonprofit was to really make a lot of information available. So there's a lot out there for videos, and articles and so on. So you can learn, like, the pure knowledge transfer, that's all out there.
Yeah.
What is also needed, though, I think, is some people are really great at learning from books, for example. You know, like they read a book and then they just apply it, which I find amazing and really great, but not everybody is, that's not everybody's learning style. That's also why we do still offer trainings. And that's kind of where you can see all the nuances, right? And really see it done in practice, because for some people it kind of is more learning by experiencing and by things rubbing off.
Yeah.
Really.
And this is all online because you're in the States.
Yes. It's all online. I mean, we do some things in person, but really we've always been online. Even pre-pandemic, we've always been online because it's so international. So yeah, that's the training. And then typically what happens is that groups need like a little bit of hand holding in the beginning at the very least. And there's a lot of variety there. Some people, as I said, read the book and do it on their own. Some people read the book and some articles and get a little bit of training and then go do it themselves. And that's all great, right? And some people really say, hey, can we have ongoing coaching and look at it together? And whatever level of hand holding people choose, we're able to provide.
And obviously your organization, Sociocracy for All, can do some of the hand holding. Are there other organizations?
Yes, there are a bunch of freelancing consultants out there. There's a bunch of other consulting consulting groups that offer sociocracy. Yeah, it's around. It's findable.
Yeah, and how to apply it in your organization? Where to start?
Yes, that's a nice one. Where to start? Well, here's something that we've learned. First of all, of course, so there's several dynamics at play. The first dynamic is some people don't like it, that it's a thing. They have instant resistance if you say, there's this thing called sociocracy, let's try it out. They're like, oh, it's a thing, can't be good. I don't like it. I don't want it.
Right. It's something else. You think, oh no, that's something else I have to learn.
Right. Or like there's kind of immediate suspicion. They're not, some people don't walk around and think, I wonder how that's going to make my life easier. But they think like, oh, it's a burden. It's like it's just all of that. It can't be good if it's a thing. There's something about systems that somehow, anyway. But so what we have noticed is that for some people, the best approach is to just say, not even use the word and just say, hey, for example, rounds, which we haven't talked to yet, but the practice of talking one by one is a thing that's done in sociocracy. So you can just say, hey, I picked up this thing, like that's a really sweet way to have a meeting where we just talk one by one, or on this particular question, I'd really like to hear everybody, and not just some of us. Could we go around and hear from each one what they're thinking? So then you're basically introducing elements from sociocracy without even making it a big deal. The other piece then is so that's possible to some extent because you're not changing power structure that way, right? You're just kind of introducing some of the software, but the hardware doesn't change. But that's a start. And then people might at some point say, hey, you keep bringing new things. Like, where do you get that from? I'm like, oh yeah, it's sociocracy. Let's learn a little about it because there's more there. And one of the important dynamics that I wish people knew earlier in their journey is that we've seen it again and again and again, that people learn about sociocracy and get super excited. And then what happens is that kind of, let's say they have their organization and they learn about it, they are now way ahead of everybody else in the excitement and in how much they know. And that itself is a problematic thing, actually, because it increases that dynamic of, ooh, so-and-so really, is really excited. That's super suspicious. I'm sure that's a cult. And also just because now that person that's starting to see what's possible gets really frustrated and impatient.
Right.
So it becomes a difference or the differential is hard to bridge.
Right.
So that's why our advice is, if you get excited, instantly almost find 2 or 3 others and send them things, try to find allies, try to find companions on that journey as
keep
soon
everybody
as
at the same level and growing together.
Right, or maybe not even everybody, but at least some people,
Yeah.
right? Because it's very different if I'm the person who is saying like sociocracy, 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 right? And everybody's like, oh, there goes Ted with sociocracy. I'm sure it's crazy, you know. Or whether it's 4 or 5 people that say, hey, we looked at sociocracy, it looks really good, you know. That's just a whole different thing. So if you're excited, take
Yeah,
at least 2
yeah.
people and bring them there too.
You talked about, so a little bit about the details. You talked a bit about rounds. What's that?
So yeah, as I said, it's a simple practice of talking one by one. So for example, if we have a proposal, or let's say somebody has an idea in a meeting, and we want to hear what people think about the idea, it's what we will do is do a round where everybody now says their reaction to the idea, and maybe a second round where we can react to the reactions. Yeah, but it's
And can people pass? Can people pass?
They can pass, yes. In some rounds, if it's just about what's your reaction, they can pass. If it's about do you have a question, they can pass. If they don't have a question, they cannot pass if it's a consent round.
Right.
And we're asking whether they consent or reject, right? That's the whole discussion about can you abstain, and no, you cannot. Because if you don't have an opinion, that means you consent, because that means you don't have an objection. Anyway, so there's, yeah, those are the different rounds, and you know, but there's more rounds, like a check-in round at the beginning of the meeting, a check-out round, meeting evaluation at the end of the meeting. That's just the standard way of doing things.
And each circle sort of elects a delegate to sit at the next level circle. That's right, isn't it?
Yes. So between those nested circles, like I was saying earlier, between, let's say, marketing and social media, and then social media and Twitter, let's say these are each teams of 5 people, you know, you would have 2 people on marketing circle that are also members of social media. And ideally, as you're saying, one goes one way and one that goes the other way. So one person from marketing is selected to also be a part of social media, and one person of social media would be selected to also be a part of marketing, so that we have a good connection between those 2 and information can really travel. And one of them would be called the leader and one of them would be called the delegate.
Right. And there's a manual on your website, on Sociocracy for All's website, that I guess gives all the details about this kind of thing.
Yes, many voices, one song.
And that's many voices, one song. Okay, and I'll put a link to that. It's free, isn't it?
No, many voices. Oh, there's a smaller manual, just a Sociocracy introduction on our content page. Yes, that we have. No, many voices, one song is a book. So that is, there's an ebook, there's a print book. Yeah, and there's, we try to offer these different levels of detail. Many voices, one song is really kind of written as a reference manual. It has, I would say, almost everything in it. I always joke that if people read it cover to cover, they'll know more than me.
Oh, right. Okay. But there's a smaller sort of there's a smaller free manual on your website, isn't there? I'll put a link to that.
Yes.
So what happens if it all goes wrong? If it all goes completely pear-shaped, or just doesn't work as you hoped? What happens next? How do you extricate or solve those problems?
Well, ideally, a sociocratic organization will be a self-repairing organization, because let's say something goes wrong in one circle, okay? They would, of course, first try to solve it themselves. So maybe there is some tension between people and they are really on bad terms with each other and they don't talk anymore and whatever. So, and of course, you know, they would try to solve it themselves first. The next step would be that the parent circle, so to speak, hears about it, and then it might be on them. And that's typically all it takes. You know, something might escalate kind of one step out of the circle, but then, you know, you would have people in the parent circle that are not as involved in the drama, and they might have some fresh look added, and then support whatever conflict engagement is needed. Let's say that doesn't work, then it just goes up and up, always to the parent circle. So there's structurally kind of a support system built in, because you're always a part of a next higher thing, so to speak. Where then there would be support. We do highly recommend, because this requires that people are able to solve conflicts themselves, right? Or to solve conflicts, period. We do highly recommend that people get trained in all kinds of different modalities of that, because you can't just run up to your boss and say, solve this. This person is, this person is wrong and I'm right. And now go solve it. And you have to somehow do it together. That's ultimately what it all boils down to. So we do a lot of like non-binding communication and just all the mediation and communication modalities will be useful.
What advice would you give to a group thinking about applying sociocracy?
Two things. One is find a group where you can attend a meeting.
Say it again.
One is find a group where you can attend a meeting, just so that you see the culture of it a little bit. And by the way, in Sociocracy for All, our meetings are by default open, so people can contact us and ask. But another piece is to just overall find an organization that is similar to yours and look at the structure and talk to the people, just so that you get a feel for what it could be. And fortunately, by now, there's basically all kinds of forms of organizations that are sociocratic. So you will find something that is similar. And that is a lot of what we do, by the way, is that networking, right? Of like, do you know a whatever, this and that kind of organization in the UK? And like, yeah, chances are we do, Or do you know a for-profit in Turkey that uses sociocracy? Well, yes, there's just always somebody who knows something, and we kind of have pulled together a lot of just institutional knowledge and people who know things and have seen things and heard things, so that we can make connections like that. And that is, I think, that networking of practitioners is really useful for people to start, because it gives you credibility, right? Like if I go and talk to my organization, I can say, hey, I talked to 2 other co-ops that are doing this, that are similar to us.
Yeah.
That's going to be very different. You can really look at it, and you don't have to just think with all our fears and anxieties about what it would look like. You can really be like a big learning community, right? Of, let's say, all sociocratic co-ops, all sociocratic intentional communities. Like we have communities of practice like that we host to really support that connection. I think that's useful. So finding that is my advice.
Just to check something you said there's Sociocracy for All, your meetings are open. Do you mean they're online, or they're recorded and people can see them?
They're online, because we're an international organization, and they are open to visitors. So if people send me an email and say, can I attend a general circle meeting? It's generally yes.
Right. Wow. Okay. That's fantastic. And are there recordings of past meetings so people can see how it works?
We do have a few meetings that are, yes, we do have a set of meeting recordings on our facilitation page. So that's on sociocracyforall.org/facilitation. There is a meeting that is recorded. Honestly, it's a staged meeting, but it was actually really funny, because we made up a circle, okay? And then we recorded this whole meeting. And by the end, we were all really confused, because it felt so real that we thought that we had really made those decisions, but the circle didn't really exist. Like we totally tripped ourselves up. And for years, we were still thinking, wait, didn't we decide that? Oh, that wasn't that staged meeting, that wasn't actually a decision. So, it was staged, but it felt so real that even I couldn't tell the difference. Right. So it's something that's good to watch.
Right. Okay. I'll put links to that as well. So, any legalities, any regulations covering sociocracy? Anything else that people need to think about?
I mean, kind of going back to what we said earlier of what is the budget decision, what are the legal decisions? That's really it that I can think of right now.
Any grants or any other help available?
Not from us.
No.
We are in need as well. We're chronically underfunded ourselves. Yeah. No, it really, I guess, let's see. What we do is we give scholarships, right, for training. That is something that we do, and for conferences and so on. But we always have to find a mix ourselves, right, to make it available. We received a grant to offer free training to climate activists, which we're excited about. Right. So that will happen very soon. yeah, so everybody trying to make it work, as others, and we'll figure it out.
So any books or videos or anything else that you recommend that I can put on the site?
Sociocracyforall.org/content
Right.
has a lot of articles and a lot of yeah, it has that overview booklet that I refer to. That is the best one that kind of leads one everywhere. If people are interested in the communities of practice and kind of finding practitioners, there's information there. So yeah, it should all, we have a lot of information on our website. That's a little bit of a struggle to like, what is the information people need when it's so many different things. Yeah, and you know, last resort is always to send an email and ask. But yeah, so there are videos, there are articles, and then we have a mailing list, so people can subscribe and, for example, hear about webinars. You know, like we try and cycle through some of the sectors in webinars, like here co-op, here nonprofit, and conferences and such, so that people hear those stories. As I said earlier, we want practitioners to be supportive of other practitioners, so that's why we invite them and let them tell their story.
Yeah. So any other background information, any other sort of insider information, insider tips, and anything to inspire people, really? So one of the main aims of these topic introductions is to get people's attention and to inspire people to find out more and maybe try it themselves. So is there anything else from that you could think of to give a bit more background, or any tips or anything to inspire people?
I think it's a thing about how to get started. Let's take one moment to add to that. So one thing that I said is doing rounds, right? It's something that you can just do now. Like in your next meeting, you can ask, hey, could we do a little go around on that one? Like that's something you don't have to, you know, learn much about. You don't have to make an intentional decision to now be Sociocratic or any of it, right?
You haven't crossed the line into anything different. You're just trying to figure out.
You do it once, see what it feels like, see how it lands on people, and that's it. Do it again or don't. You know, like it's a very low threshold that you can just do. A little bit of a higher threshold, but still not super crazy, is to suggest consent as a decision-making method. Like, hey, could we, instead of voting or instead of so-and-so deciding, maybe just make sure that nobody has an objection, to make sure it's really good enough, you know, that we really hear from everybody on that one. Like there's different ways of saying it, right? But that would be a way to kind of sell consent decision-making as in just natural language without making it a thing. So that's another one. And the other piece, for example, is looking up the meeting format. The meeting template is just totally awesome. So I really love it. And I wonder why people are still struggling when it's out there. So just a simple method. And again, you can read that up, but starting with a check-in, everybody, and that's common now in many groups, right? Everybody does one round where they say how they are. Then the next thing is we have an admin piece that's easiest to look up. Next piece is to talk about the agenda and make a decision together of, yes, this is our agenda. This is how we want to spend our time. And going through the different pieces, and then just doing one closing round of what was this meeting like. Like that is a very simple and kind of the beginner version of the meeting template. And it's very effective. So this is something that everybody can just do who facilitates a meeting. You don't have to necessarily ask permission, right? Because all you're doing is you're asking more people about what they think. That's not something necessary. It typically is a step up and not a step down, right? So that's again something you can just do. So there are little gems like that that are really easy entry. And what ideally people see is that it's so doable, right? So it doesn't become this huge step that is just so daunting, but it becomes something that is built out of little steps that you can just learn into.
What kind of feedback do you get? Is it mainly sort of complimentary? Is it mainly positive, or do you get much critical feedback? You know, people say, anyway, it just doesn't work for us. It's consent is too difficult to achieve.
No, I mean, sometimes we hear from groups that say, oh, we tried it and hated it. But that's typically never direct. I don't know if people just don't dare to tell us, or maybe it's just the groups that kind of have only done it superficially anyway. That's my suspicion, but I don't
what sort
know.
of reasons do they give? What sort of reasons do they give that they hate it?
Hardly any. It's the first. They just say we hated it. It didn't work. I'm like, okay,
right.
but what didn't work? What didn't you like? Yeah, it took a long time. We go like, that's a little suspicious because it shouldn't, like, so was it simply not well done? But typically, again, since this is hearsay or people throwing that out on social media, I do not typically have the information because the people that I work with don't have that. And one interesting thing, by the way, is that, and that's also going to the middle of the conversation, why I struggle a little with the like take what you want and leave the rest approach. Because what I hear quite a bit is that people, for example, use consent decision making, right? But they don't change their structure. So now they try to make a consent decision with 30 people. Where you go like, yeah, don't do rounds with 30 people. That's it's not made that way. So but people think that they can just take the decision making and ignore the rest. It's like, well, but it's not that easy, right? It's a system where all the pieces fit together. So you will feel if you are ignoring 2/3 of it, you will feel that difference. So that's, that's where I would want to have like a deeper conversation with the people who say it didn't work. And we're like, well, which part did you use? Did you use the other parts, right? Because it is really a system that is fairly complete, and it's easy to what's the word? Bastardize? Is that the word? I don't know. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right then. Are you happy to respond to queries in the comments on the blog?
Sure. If I get notifications.
Yeah, I'll notify you. And okay, that's really, really interesting. I want to thank you very, very much for talking with me, Ted.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
I'll let you know when it's live. And yeah, I'll let you know how we get on with our sociocratic process. And yeah, hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
Yes, great. All righty.
Thank you, Ted. Nice talking with you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Dave.